Blimey. This is one hell of a jam jar you got here.
The House of Mystery contains demons, angels, elementals, magicians, wizards, apparitions, adult language, and discussions. If you're easily offended, do not enter the House of Mystery.
All right, then. On with the show.
I am not a very good DJ, obviously. That was not synced very well at all. What a great way to start the show. Welcome, everyone, to the House of Mystery, the John Constantine and Friends podcast. I am Michael, your host. In the House of Mystery with me is the demon bisexual butler, David Sabal. Hello, David.
Hello, everybody.
How are you today?
Oh, very excited, sir, because we're gonna be talking about a title that is truly deserving to be in the House of Mystery.
Yeah, we are. All right, so if you guys are new to our show, you can find all of our shows, past and present, on iTunes and Spotify, which are our preferred feeds due to its rating and review systems. However, if you search House of Mystery wherever you choose to listen to podcasts, our show should pop up just the same. All right, so here we are again. We spent the majority of 2021 season breaking down Swamp Thing stories, and it looks like 2022 will be filled with more Swamp Thing, with Ram V series 2021 series being extended into this year, and then the title we are covering in this episode, Swamp Thing Green Hell #1. It looks like it's going to be a great 2 years for Swamp Thing.
I think so.
If only we can find a way to bring that Hellblazer title back as well. 2022 will be the best of all years.
The best of all years.
If they can do that, please.
Oh yeah, dude, we're coming off of a really strong series from Ram V, and now we're going to a series by Jeff Lemire, who knocks it out of the park when it comes to making sure to separate his Swamp Thing story. Let's make that clear.
Yeah.
This is his Swamp Thing story from Ram V's.
Yeah.
And able to actually make it so different, but so, for me, engaging, because he decides to harken back to the old DC comic horror vibes.
Bringing it back.
And while, Ram V focused on more of like a more personal narrative, I love the fact that Lemire basically said, nah, we're going to go old school. We're going to go gore.
Yeah.
And we're going to go suspense with this.
Yeah. I agree with you. It's surprising. I didn't expect it to suck because the creative powers involved are very talented. But coming from Ram V's Swamp Thing, we were all about it. So I wasn't quite sure how this would, coming so close on the heels of Ram V's storyline, I wasn't sure whether or not this would connect with me. And I'll say just right out the gate, I want to express my appreciation for this title. I mean, it's on DC's mature imprint, DC Black Label, and the work Jeff Lemire and his artist, Mankey, is that how you say the name?
Mankey, yeah.
And David Barron did with this is both shocking, clever, and gorgeous. Oh, yeah. And all of this is wrapped neatly within the semantics of the horror genre. They got it down perfectly. And I can't express enough how perfect Lemire captured the genre. And I want to say he was dabbling, if I had to pull something out of my mind of all the things of horror that I've seen throughout my life and the things we've studied when it comes to film, I want to say that he was dabbling within or paying tribute to the late 1950s horror cinema, or possibly even the exploitation era of the 60s and 70s, with some strong notes of Carpenter's The Thing as well.
I was going to bring that up, is like, especially with the way he portrays, quote unquote, the villainous Swamp Thing. It's more like John Carpenter's The Thing.
Oh, yeah.
And
when he first comes out of the water, I'm like, that looks just like The Thing.
Yes. With all the body parts,
it was amazing.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
And then, like, when you throw in the whole element of, the humanity is on its last legs, and you have like this survivor story. As funny as it sounds, that just gave me vibes from the get-go of The Thing. these people trapped on this island, and now they're surrounded, and now they have to deal with the Swamp Thing coming around and wanting to purge the world of like all of humanity.
Listen, if I was chosen as the avatar of the Green Dave, I would gladly take on that duty. Like, listen, we decided that we're going to give up on humanity.
Oh, come on, Mike.
I've given up on humanity years ago, so I'm in. I'm game. Let's go ahead and do this.
But Mike, in the end, wouldn't you rather be the old man in the lighthouse? Come on.
I want to be friends with the old man in the lighthouse, but I want to destroy the world, David.
You want to destroy the world?
Don't take that away from me, okay?
See, as funny as it sounds, I was so hooked in figuring out who the man in the lighthouse was, and when they did the reveal,
what a spoiler, David! You're such a spoiler.
Yes, I was like, oh no, this makes sense, and I want to be the man in the lighthouse.
I'm just glad you didn't tell me, because I know you read this before me, and thank you for not, because it was a good surprise, and it was spoiled for me a little bit on social media. Somebody said, I want to say when I was going through hashtags, because sometimes I don't fully read the tweets, I'll just skim and see what people are saying. And someone mentioned a lighthouse.
Yes.
And Constantine. I'm like, I keep scrolling. And then when I started reading the title and they mentioned the lighthouse and the man in the lighthouse, I'm like, is this Constantine? So I will say that I do appreciate when the story takes place, just so there's a clear difference between what's currently going on with Ram V's limited Swamp Thing run on the regular DC label and here on Black Label.
Yes.
I think going into the future, in a future that's not quite stated when and where it takes place, I think most of us get the idea that it has to be at least 40 or 50 years in the future.
In the future. And also the beautiful thing about Black Label, a lot of the titles you could say it goes into the DC universe, or you could not say it's like a separate universe type thing.
Yes, it's a different continuity, but it's still canon.
Yes.
Yeah. Absolutely. So yes, if people didn't catch on to what we were saying, Constantine is in the issue, which makes a beautiful concept with amazing art that much better.
Oh yeah.
When you throw in that character.
The cockroach that will not die.
Yeah. That's why I started laughing. The world is dead. It's gone. There's only a few people left. And of course, Constantine's alive in a lighthouse doing God knows what.
And telling people to stay away from him. That's the best part, is like the entire story, you're constantly told, oh, we stay away from that guy, the guy in the lighthouse. And it's almost like they're warned never to deal with him.
Yeah.
And then when it comes down to it, they have to go deal with him. I'll be honest, at first, I thought because it's a Swamp Thing title, I was like going, it's Alec Holland. It has to be Alec Holland in the
My mind was going there too, yeah.
But then when you get to the reveal of Constantine just sitting there, legs crossed, and you know what's so sad, Mike? Even though he's old, he's still in the same goddamn getup.
Whatever, dude. Don't hate. It's a uniform, dude.
It's like he doesn't change.
Does anyone ever complain that Batman's in the same uniform?
No, that's the thing. That's the thing.
This is his uniform.
And I'm like going, man, Constantine is the cockroach of DC Universe.
Yeah.
And it made sense.
Yeah, it actually does. That's why I grinned like ear to ear. I'm pretty sure if someone was looking at me when I was reading this, they probably thought I was an idiot. Because it was just ear to ear with pleasure that he was the one in the lighthouse with his fucking grin.
With his fucking grin. And he's surrounded. It's probably my favorite panel of the entire comic, besides like all the gore, but that shot of Constantine just sitting in the rocking chair, legs crossed, surrounded with nothing but like cigarettes and bottles of whatever on the floor, books all over the place, because obviously he's been reading. but besides that, everything else is just dilapidated and just rotting away. And there's Constantine.
That's how it should be. How it should be. David, okay, so we do need to get into this officially, but first, I want to get a more succinct thought from you, your initial thoughts, if you will.
My initial thoughts, I went into this title a little hesitant at first because we were just coming off of Ram V's title, which was really strong. So one of the things when I went into this title was I had to go in thinking to myself, how are they going to differentiate? How are they going to give me a different feel than Ram V? because they got to. You cannot make another personal story about Swamp Thing when I just came off of a really great personal story by Ram V. And then when I started reading, I'm like, okay, this is less about Swamp Thing personally. It's actually about, like, it feels like that 80s horror film. You're thrust into a situation where humanity is on its last legs, and literally nature has decided we're going to turn on them and wipe the slate clean. And it's not like this personal story. It is actually a horror film.
Yeah.
Vibe when you get down to it. When it reminds me of like the old, like what you said, those 1950s where it's like them.
The Blob.
The nature versus humanity.
Yeah, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It had that vibe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then when you get all the elements together, I was really surprised that, I shouldn't say I was surprised, but I was pleasantly surprised that Jeff Lemire pulled on the right elements from the DC universe. He's pulling on the horror side.
Horror side. I like pulling on the horror side sometimes.
He's pulling on the horror side. I crack up because after I read it, I was looking at the forum and people were like saying, "Oh, why did humanity fall? What happened to all the superheroes?" I'm like going, time passes.
Yeah.
That is the perfect way of
Guess
putting
what?
it.
Bruce Wayne dies. He's human.
He's human.
Sorry.
Clark is a living being.
I will say,
wastes away.
David, I will say, I did get a little annoyed when I was going through the hashtags after I read this. I wish Batman was the one in the Lighthouse. Like, motherfuckers.
Yeah, I
so
know.
40 titles a month isn't enough for you. Now you want him to be the man in the Lighthouse. There was people actually disappointed in that on Twitter. I'm like, well, first off, it's a Swamp Thing title. So why do you care that Batman is or is not in there? Now, if you're dealing with Swamp Thing, for us readers that are big Swamp Thing fans, it would feel a little weird when you take into account the typical characters that mingle with Swamp Thing. And if you were to put Batman in there, it would feel weird. And that's what
another thing that I was really happy with, because Jeff Lemire literally,
you have to use the right characters.
Brought in the right characters for the scenario, because if you were to actually bring in Batman, there's no relationship that we can pull off of Swamp Thing and Batman.
Yeah, but he's the greatest detective in the world, David. He could solve this problem of the world flooding just with 30 seconds of a thought.
A thought. But like, now you throw in Constantine, who actually has a very personal relationship with Swamp Thing, and not just Swamp Thing, but the Alec Holland Swamp Thing.
Yeah.
That is what actually really put my mind at ease.
Yeah.
And as soon as I finished the title the first time, I closed it up going, I'm happy with this title.
Yeah.
I know where I have this really clear idea of where we're going, and I like where Jeff Lemire is taking us because he respects the Swamp Thing mythos.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get into this officially here. It's an interesting setting, and I have the synopsis here. It's all right. So Jeff Lemire. Now, if people out there want to argue with our pronunciation of his last name, go ahead, because I'm not sure. It's either Lemire or Lemire. I've heard it pronounced so many different ways.
I say Lemire.
So that's what I have always called him. But then there are a few people that I've seen say Lemire. It's impossible to know with the English language. Since, here in America, we fuck up the English language so bad, and we just change rules for no reason just because we want to. All right, so Jeff Lemire, the author of the smash hits Joker, Killer Smile, and The Question, The Deaths of Vic Sage, along with the graphic novel that inspired the television sensation Sweet Tooth, returns to Black Label with one of the greatest artists in modern DC history, Doug Mahnke. Together, they'll unleash a gory, gruesome monster mash where the fate of humanity rests in the hands of someone who isn't human at all. The Earth is all but done. The last remnants of humanity cling to a mountaintop island lost in endless floodwater. The parliaments of the green, the red, and the rot all agree it's time to wipe the slate clean and start the cycle of life over again. And to do so, they have united their powers to summon an avatar, one of the most horrific monsters to ever stalk the surface of this forsaken planet. Okay. That's very, very dramatic.
It is.
Did I read it well, though?
Yes.
Did I read?
You were just missing, the music in the background.
Okay, good. All right. Okay, so I'd like to mention the direction that Lemire took with the story makes for an interesting allegory. The initial issues appear to be, or I should say the initial issue appeared to be based on the concept of ecological balance and the idea that within our natural world, there's a hierarchy. And we get this idea when the elements, the green, the red, and the rot, discuss essentially their existence and the perceived fate if they allow this doomed future to continue. So like all of the best ecological horror films and literature out there, nature strikes. They decide to eliminate mankind, rid the world of the plague that is humankind. They no longer deserve their autonomy due to their blatant arrogance. I like that scenario because it does, like, in my opinion, all good literature, good movies, comics, it's a refraction of the reality that we are in. You take those elements, you split them apart, and through that process, you tell a story that resembles a future or a world that's somewhat similar to ours so that you can then draw those connections and show people this is what's happening right now currently. This is our world. This is what's happening. So I like when they do that. It makes for a much more interesting story and something that has a little bit more relevancy to our lives, which we all know. If we don't pull back on some of our pollution, our pollutants, and what we do to this world, there's going to be an ecological threat, all right. And it's definitely going to strike. So some might think this sounds similar to the stories we've read before, and sure, perhaps even with Ram V's recent Swamp Thing run. But where Ram V's story is a more nuanced character study, like you mentioned, Dave.
It's a more personal story.
Yeah, this relies on a much larger concept or premise and relies, at least the first issue, relies on imagery to transport us to a post-apocalyptic world.
Yes.
Where a variation of existentialism is used to instigate horror and motivate the plot.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is like, when you take a look at this first issue and the Ram V's, honestly, this one feels like you can easily make this into a big blockbuster movie.
Yeah. Oh, and the difference with this one is, so Ram V's take, it was very personal. It was more about the individual. It was about the new character. His name eludes me at the moment, but it's more about that specific person. This is more in your face. This is a high concept, and it's about us. It's about our world. It's literally taking things that have happened in our culture pertaining to the world and how we treat it, and then showing us what will happen if we don't reverse course.
Yeah.
And that's why, I mean, that's how almost every Swamp Thing story should. Even Ram V's story definitely delved into the ecological issues of today, but it was more focused on the immediateness of that character, the more nuanced character study.
Yeah.
And with this one here, we're getting those notes of existentialism and the meaning of life. You know, does life even matter when it's all but destroyed? Is humanity even worth the effort?
Especially when you paint humanity in such an ugly manner. Like, I like the fact that basically we understand why the people, basically the whole instigating event is that one moment when the villagers decide to stand up for themselves. You do realize that? We all understand why they want to stand up for themselves and why they want to protect themselves. But in doing so, because they chose the violent method, the violent way, they created the new Swamp Thing.
Yep.
Yes, the green, the rot, and the red are all instigating in the background, but humanity itself needed to destroy itself.
Yeah, that's why it's so perfect, because our destruction isn't even necessarily the elements. It is us.
It's
and
us.
Through us, then the elements kill us. But they're using our bloodshed what we do to ourselves as the very weapon to wipe us off the planet. That's why when the bad guy, essentially, I forgot his name, the new Avatar. I forgot his name, but the new Avatar, when he fell into the water and they took his body and said they own him, this is the individual we'll use. It was just such a beautiful representation of the destruction of humanity and how we are our own instigators of our fate. And the elements are just reactionary.
The villain that you basically mentioned, he's not even given a name. If you look at it, the only one that's really talked about is Donald, who's the quote unquote the main character of the story till, Swamp Thing and good old John Constantine shows up. Donald is actually our main character. And that's the father of the daughter, right? Mm-hmm. We know that he's connected to the villain because they make the comment that basically he makes the one villain basically looks at, my sister knew that this was going to happen. You just didn't decide to listen. And, basically the villain was being a villainous dick. But throughout the entire thing, his name is never mentioned, which I think maybe was a way for us to not basically center on who he is, but almost like he's the avatar of humanity.
He's the embodiment of all of our imperfections and mistakes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what I think that of that character, that villain.
It's very poetic.
It's very poetic because I look back at it, I'm like going, did they even give his name? No. Donald, they mentioned him. They mentioned Georgie. They mentioned, I forgot his daughter's name. But like when you get to his part, his name's never brought up. And I'm like going, I wonder if that was, I think that was chosen by Jeff Lemire to make the audience almost personify and look at the villain as saying, oh yeah, he's a representation of us. That's what Jeff Lemire is saying. Our destruction is the Swamp Thing that is created out of that, the guy that embodies, greed, hate, I want to say sarcasm because he was very sarcastic to Donald in their plight. Unforgiving, not helpful. That's all things that we can all feel is part of humanity.
Yeah. I mean, it goes right back to what you were saying. Violence begets more violence.
Violence begets more violence.
When one violence is perpetrated, it creates a continuing cycle that creates more and different forms of violence, spreading out in a wave from the initial point. And that's why this first issue is, as I said, it is light in plot, but it's heavy in foreshadowing and
context. Context.
Yes, there you go.
Because like if you think about it, too, the new Swamp Thing, he's created from humanity's negative emotions or negative spectrum, right? Mm-hmm. And he's a beast. He just looks just like we said. The visuals remind us of the Thing. He's very deformed. He's very grotesque, right? But then when our Swamp Thing, the heroic Swamp Thing, Alec Holland's Swamp Thing shows up, he's more human. He's more, he tried to choke out John Constantine, but that's understandable because of their relationship. But that Swamp Thing is more forgiving. And he's more of the better part of humanity because that's what always was the story of Alec Holland. The reason why Alec Holland was the perfect Swamp Thing avatar was because he never let go of his humanity. Whereas you look at this story, the creature that's created, his humanity is completely gone because he wasn't human from the get-go. He was a villain. He was a dick. He was truly a monster.
Well, doesn't it depend on the consciousness of the individual that's consumed by the green?
By the green, yeah.
Yeah, and Alec Holland was a good person, whereas this guy obviously, as we had said, represents all of humankind's grossest mistakes and errors. I mean, he's a murderer, he's greedy, he's selfish.
He turns on his own family. Think about that.
Yeah.
He turns on his own family because if his sister was married to Donald, that means Donald was his family.
And also, you have to remember, as we know, based on Ram V's Swamp Thing, as well as decades of history pertaining to the one Alec Holland, you do have control for the most part.
For the most part.
you do make your decisions. You have some autonomy. So the fact that this creature doesn't even hold back, doesn't even think what he's doing, and he's killing the remaining human population goes to show you that this avatar was well chosen by the elements, because he doesn't give a shit. He's a bad person, so he's doing exactly what's in his nature, and that's the beautiful thing of it. The fact that they're using humanity to kill humanity, is definitely a strong message.
Brutally too, because some of the kills that he was doing, that is a brutal monster. I mean, the one kill that sticks in my mind constantly is the one where the lady tries to shoot him with the shotgun, and instead of ripping her to pieces like the other ones that he did on the pier, he just basically takes a piece of himself and shoots it right through her eyeball. And through the back of her head. And I'm like going, oh, listen, that was disgusting.
I'm not one for violence, but if you can capture violence and make violence look gorgeous, then okay, I'm okay with it.
I'm okay with it.
It was amazing. That whole sequence was really well done. You have this new avatar, as we had mentioned, that's no doubt inspired by John Carpenter's The Thing. The way it kills and stalks are very similar, holding on to human limbs that it has ripped from the bodies. The imagery is like that of a nightmare, an avenging ecological demon. The metaphor is quite clear. And we are facing an ecological nightmare, and this new avatar is the metaphor incarnate. It's great.
Oh, yeah.
That aspect is great. And this is the first issue, so it is light overall in, I want to say plot, but it did do the trick in the way of setting up the story. So that being said, I do expect a little bit more from issue 2 as well as issue 3. Since this was a great setup, the bulk of the story definitely needs to come within issue 2 and issue 3 for sure. Because as it stands, I will say that Jeff Lemire took advantage of Black Label's paneling, the size that's so just fantastic in scope. It's designed to showcase the artistry.
Yeah.
So he used every single page and panel perfectly. There was no waste of space, which is my problem many times with the prestige format that many of the DC Black Label titles utilize. Many times you have 2 or 3, sometimes 4 pages with nothing on it. There's no dialogue. Sometimes there's an entire page dedicated to just one image, and it just feels like the writer is trying just to move through the page count rather than focusing on using every part of that panel. Batman Damned did really well with that.
Oh, yeah.
Jeff Lemire's other title on Black Label, The Question, did very well with that. An example of a writer that did not do very good with the prestige format was, or very well with the prestige format, was, of course, Tom Taylor with Rise and Fall. There was a lot of that wasted space. There was a lot of just panels there for panel's sake. There was little to no story. It almost felt like he was just trying to get through the pages. And if he can use just one giant image for a single page. Hey, that's a job well done, right? And that's not the case with this. Jeff Lemire utilized literally every aspect of that page.
Oh, yeah, because like even down to the, not just the use of using the characters to tell a story, but also I give a lot of props with, I believe it's Doug Mankey. Doug Mankey as the artist.
Oh, is it Mankey?
Yeah, Mankey. Doug Mankey as the artist did a fantastic job just being able to set the tone right, using the shadows. Dude, the last couple pages where he's telling the story of the old man in the tower, and he's using these shadows to kind of like cover Constantine's face.
Yeah,
because we all know Constantine's a dangerous person. He's not. He may be happy-go-lucky and he may be quote unquote friendly, but at the end of the day, there is like this side of Constantine that will turn around and kill you without any qualms, because we know he's willing to make those sacrifices if it calls for it, because for the quote unquote better good. And I love the fact in the last couple pages, they're telling a story not just with the colors, but also using the shadows, using the lighting, like truly using the lighting as a film technique.
Yeah. Well, there's that moment where the bad Avatar of the Green, the new Avatar of the Green, comes out of the water.
Oh my God.
And they are able to give the impression that water is flowing from the branches within his body.
Yes.
And there's just this blue hue that's emanating from his midsection.
Yes.
I don't think I've seen anything like that in a comic book before. Sure, I've read a lot of comic books and there are some great things that artists do, but I do not believe I've seen something like that utilized before, that technique. Because Dave, I had to look at it numerous times. It's almost like an illusion to the eye. It looks like water flowing
Out of him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really well done.
And you take it in contrast with like the body parts that are around him. Like they still have like flecks of red and blood all over them. And some of them have like still the facial features of the victims still plastered on them of fear, of like,
yeah, it's like the
sheer
Thing.
shock. It's the Thing.
It's like the Thing where it's to this day when you watch. That's why the Thing is such an amazing movie. Maybe one of the best horror films of all time.
To me, it's
because it still holds up.
It still holds up.
Yeah.
And it holds up with its imagery because like I've always told people I love horror films. Horror films are that is my part of that I always feel personal about my filmmaking is the horror side, the horror industry. And to this day, I've always told people the Thing is the only one that maintains that true horror element where you have to keep your audience uncomfortable.
Well, it also utilizes the Lovecraftian technique of dread.
Yeah.
And
it uses those imageries of grotesqueness to continue that dread.
Yeah. Yeah. And Jeff Lemire.
He pulls it off.
He pulls this off very well. I was very surprised. I'm not a huge fan of Jeff's work, but the things I've read for the most part I do enjoy. I know I want to say Tom Taylor took my hate spot. I did hate on Jeff Lemire a little bit at the beginning of our shows, only because we were talking about the New 52, John Constantine, and I will say and I stand by the fact that he didn't do a great job with that.
I will agree.
And maybe now that I'm reading more of his work, and plus I believe he's the writer behind Black Hammer, right?
Yes.
Which is really good. So I'm wondering if the label is to blame and not Jeff Lemire. Maybe they're saying, hey, you know what?
You can't have these people just like blowing up to pieces.
Yeah. I'm wondering if that's what happened, because I read that work and it just doesn't compute, because Black Hammer, Vic Sage, and now of course Swamp Thing, and there was another title recently that we were talking about he also did really well with. So obviously this guy knows how to write the hell out of a comic, and perhaps we'll never know why the New 52 Constantine as well as the Justice League Dark wasn't the greatest of stories after that first volume.
My whole as much as I have read now the Justice League Dark from its very beginnings to like its current iteration and stuff like that, what I've noticed is in the early on, I really feel that DC in the New 52 wanted to actually do something different, wanted to do something darker, but there was always like this feeling that, we have to pull back because we don't want to upset mass audiences with like shocking imagery or shocking storylines.
Yeah.
Because they wanted to treat everyone with kid gloves because they were afraid that no one's going to accept it. Instead of allowing the writers to just focus in on their writing and give us great narratives. And mostly, if you look at the New 52, the storylines that have excelled and still hold up to this day are stories of characters that DC just threw onto an artist and said, have at of it. Blank check.
Mm-hmm.
But if they had something going, like, you're writing for Batman, or you're writing for Superman or Wonder Woman, or even then John Constantine, because Constantine during that time was a character that they were wanting to push heavily into mass audiences. And if it always felt like those characters, if you didn't write them kid friendly, I'm going to say it, PG, DC would like shut you down.
Yeah, I also feel like they have finally come in. Comic books have kind of reached a, I don't want to say a renaissance, but not a renaissance, a resurgence. Since the New 52. And at that time, I believe the audience or the readership was not being represented quite right. It seems like DC wasn't quite sure who was reading their comic books, and that's why they did certain things during the New 52. And I feel like now they realize that there is a wide variety of readership. The demographics are kind of skewed. It's just all over the place. You have older people who read comics when they were young, still reading comic books. You have the younger generation reading comic books. And now they're willing to do a little bit more darker themes in the regular DC label as well now. But I don't believe that was the case back then. And ultimately, that's possibly why I just didn't connect with Jeff Lemire's run on Justice League Dark. I mean, I hated it. After,
you weren't alone.
I mean, Peter Milligan started off great. He did a great job with the first, I want to say 8 issues. The first volume was fine. And then as soon as Jeff Lemire came on, we had this whole Books of Magic storyline that was so shoddy, especially when you compare it to what Neil Gaiman did.
It fell flat.
So unfortunately, I have always felt negative feelings about Jeff Lemire until about 2 years ago when you and I started covering things again. And I am reading more of his work, and I realize that I do like it. And the Swamp Thing continues that good faith. And I hope he does more, because issue 1 was definitely a strong start, especially with how
strong start.
Especially when you look at the final quarter of the book, you know, with John Constantine's introduction, which was flawless. Was absolutely perfect.
Oh, it was.
I always say, if you give us a strong introduction of John Constantine, I'm pretty sure you'll be able to write the story adequately as well. Because introductions matter when it comes to John Constantine. It's all about how he enters that page. Every single time. It doesn't matter what title it is. If you're going to have John Constantine guest, you got to make sure you give us that reveal.
Oh, yeah.
And it was fantastic. And it was also built up with the story itself, the man in the lighthouse, the man in the lighthouse that had you wondering who this was. And then we get that scene that we all love. We love when Alec Holland and John Constantine butt heads, and the fact that they chose to end the comic with Constantine summoning the consciousness of
Alec Holland,
who immediately strangles Constantine for bringing him back, you know, framing their complicated relationship perfectly.
Oh, dude, but the best part by far about that whole scene, I don't know if Lemire wanted us to feel sorry for Alec Holland.
Oh, I did.
But like when I thought, I was like laughing.
Oh,
the
yeah.
fact that Constantine ripped Alec Holland out of heaven, because like Alec Holland basically says, "I was free, I was home," and he's like, How could you? And like, essentially,
was he in heaven, or
he was probably in heaven,
or was he in that version of the green?
He was probably basically in the version of green we all know is kind of like heaven.
Yeah,
and you know for a fact that that's like paradise. That's their heaven. So like for Constantine to rip him away from that, it's like, I was like, are we supposed to feel sorry for Alec Holland? Because I'm not feeling sorry. I'm actually laughing at this because only Constantine would rip his friend out of heaven.
Well, and the best part about it, Dave, is just that grin.
Yeah.
That grin. Like, I zoomed in on that image. I'm like, I got to see this guy's face. And it's just the perfect fucking smug grin. Who wouldn't want to strangle Constantine?
Yeah. And I like the fact that Constantine's like, the line that he gives him is, "Sorry to interrupt the vacation, Alec, my boy, but we've got a problem. Seems you've got to save us from the green."
Yeah.
And I'm like going throughout the entire time, he's just smiling. He's getting choked, but he's smiling.
Yeah. It's a good setup, and I am looking forward to issues 2 and 3. Now, if you take us over to if we go over to Comic Book Roundup, it seems like a lot of reviewers are also enjoying the title, which I would be very disappointed in humanity if they were not enjoying this title. So far, it looks like the average critic rating is 8.5 on Comic Book Roundup.
Very strong.
And the average user rating, the regular readers, is 8.2.
8.2.
Which is definitely a respectable number. I'm hoping the rating here will reflect the sales so that we can get more titles like this. And again, we're still early on, and we know there's still more to the story, but as long as it continues in this direction, I have a feeling that we're in for a good time.
Well, dude,
and we don't have much to worry about.
Some of the promotional material for the next following issues have me cracking up, because me as a Constantine and Swamp Thing fanboy started thinking, is like, the characters that they've been kind of alluding that are going to be in this series, how is it that basically they all come into play? And I started thinking to myself, what if Constantine is just the type of guy to drag everyone from the dead to save the world? And you see like a lot of the Justice League Dark members like possibly making cameos, and it makes complete sense to me. I'm like, oh, yeah, Constantine's he's that prick.
Yeah, well, listen, he has a plan. We always know there's a method to the madness. It may seem like he's just shooting from the hip,
but he's not.
But he just makes shooting from the hip. Well, maybe he is shooting from the hip. Maybe he just knows how to make it look cool.
He does.
But usually he has a plan, because look what he said at the end of the issue. He alluded to the fact that he's been waiting for them.
Yes.
He's like, it's about time you guys get here. So he knows what's up, and I'm sure he has a solution. And it's probably not going to end very well for anyone except possibly him. But we'll see where it goes. David, give me your final thoughts briefly and your RMD score.
RMD score right off the bat, I'm giving this a solid 92. I really enjoyed this title. I mean, from the get-go, if you just kept Constantine out, I thought that Lemire hit every single tone perfectly to separate himself from Ram V. And that was, as I said earlier, one of my most important things he had to do.
Yeah, I agree.
Because like when me and you first talked about this title, I remember we were going back and forth saying, we're just covering Swamp Thing by Ram V right now, and suddenly they're going to release another Swamp Thing title. How does this work?
Well, also because we were such big fans of Ram V Swamp Thing, we weren't sure how this was going to make us feel.
How it was going, like would it create a conflict among the fan base?
Yeah.
But honestly, he's done a fantastic job separating himself to the point where I could treat the two stories separately at this point.
Yeah. No, they definitely, I mean, arguably they can definitely work together as well, because this is in the future, and who's to say what time frame it is? We don't know. So, yeah, David, I agree with you. It's definitely up there on the score here. I would give it a 90%. I don't want to overblow it. I would probably give it a 95% if I was not being objective. And that's originally what I was going to give it, was a 95%. And a part of me was wondering if I was giving it a 95% just because Constantine was in it. And that's not a fair way to review something. So basing it solely on what was given to us, to me, it's a 90% on the RMD score, which is a very good score. And I have no complaints, Dave, at all. I really enjoyed the issue, and I can't wait to see what happens next. I know Constantine will be a big part of the second issue.
Yes.
And if you look at the cover for the third issue, Dave, Deadman is on it.
Yep.
So I have a feeling we're in for a very cool story.
Yes, I think so.
And I have not seen Deadman in anything truly within the vein of horror in a very long time. I want to say the last thing I saw that was very horror driven with him in it was his solo storyline, the mansion.
Oh yeah,
I forgot what it was called now, but it was a love story.
Yes,
that was probably the last time I saw him in a story that was completely governed under the horror genre. So it'll be fun to see Deadman being back where he belongs.
Yeah.
Because how many times have we said, how the fuck is Deadman not being used more, or at least being given his own title? It's
Especially in a Black Label.
yeah.
In a Black Label, he's perfect.
It absolutely is. Okay, so this does bring us to the end of our discussion. I do want to remind people that we have a Patreon page that you can go to. If you enjoy our shows, head over to patreon.com/RainmanDigital and pledge $1. If you pledge $1, you'll gain access to our Oblivion Bar episodes, which are essentially mini versions of the House of Mystery, except it's a little more casual because it's essentially a pre-show. It gets us going. We talk about topics that we don't have time to get to or things that we've been wanting to get to, and we'll talk about them during the Oblivion Bar. So head over to patreon.com/RainmanDigital and pledge. Thank you, David.
Thank you.